A sense of the sacred, building bridges between Islam and the West, delivered by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. This speech was delivered at the Wilton Park Seminar on the Sense of Sacred, 13th of December 1996. However, I am reading it from the Temenos Academy Review, which was published in spring 1998. I will put the link in the description to the PDF file of the speech for those that prefer to just skip me reciting it and to read it straight away or to refer back to it. And in this first portion of the video, I will be reading the speech, and then after I will be giving a few themes that I collated from this speech and just having an open discussion about them. And I just want to note also that these themes are what I personally felt to collate and to pick from it. However, it's always open to every reader, different perspectives, and I appreciate that also. So I am going off with what I feel intuitively from what I feel like King Charles now had tried to say in this speech. So I will begin. I hesitated a long time before suggesting that it might be worth trying to use this occasion to hold a seminar on a sense of the sacred and its relevance to the problem of understanding between the Islamic and Western worlds. I am only too aware that this is not a typical or, for some people, an easy or comfortable way of looking at what are often seen as intensely practical issues. But I am encouraged by the fact that whenever I have summoned up my courage to speak about this subject in the past, even to groups of hard-headed, practical people like international financiers or property developers, it seems always to have struck an extraordinary chord and captured a remarkable degree of attention. My belief is that in each one of us there is a distant echo of this sense of the sacred, but that the majority of us are terrified to admit its existence for fear of ridicule and abuse. This fear of ridicule, even to the extent of mentioning the name of God, is a classic indication of the loss of meaning in so-called Western civilization. I start from the belief that Islamic civilization, at its best, like many of the religions of the East, Judaism, Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, has an important message for the West in the way it has retained a more integrated and integral view of the sanctity of the world around us. I feel that we in the West could be helped to rediscover those roots of our own understanding by an appreciation of the Islamic traditions, deep respect for the timeless traditions of the natural order. I believe that process could help in the task of bringing our two faiths closer together. It could also help us in the West to rethink, and for the better, our practical stewardship of man and his environment in fields like healthcare, the natural environment, and agriculture, as well as in architecture and urban planning. I want very briefly to explain why this might be so. Modern materialism, in my humble opinion, is unbalanced and increasingly damaging in its long-term consequences, yet nearly all the great religions have held an integral view of the sanctity of the world. The Christian message with, for example, its deeply mystical and symbolic doctrine of the Incarnation has been traditionally a message of the unity of the worlds of spirit and matter, and of God's manifestation in this world and in mankind. But during the last 3 centuries, in the Western world at least, a dangerous division has come into being in the way we perceive the world around us. Science has tried to assume a monopoly, even a tyranny, over our understanding. Religion and science have become separated, with the result, as William Wordsworth said, "Little we see in nature that is ours." Science has attempted to take over the natural world from God, with the result that it has fragmented the cosmos and relegated the sacred to a separate and secondary compartment of our understanding, divorced from the practical day-to-day existence. We are only now beginning to gauge the disastrous results of this outlook. We in the Western world seem to have lost a sense of the wholeness of our environment and of our immense and inalienable responsibility to the whole of creation. This has led to an increasing failure to appreciate or understand tradition and the wisdom of our forebears accumulated over the centuries. Indeed, tradition is positively discriminated against, as if it was some socially unacceptable disease. In my view, a more holistic approach is needed in our contemporary world. Science has done the inestimable service of showing us a world much more complex than we ever imagined. But in its modern, materialist, one-dimensional form, it cannot explain everything. God is not merely the ultimate Newtonian mathematician or the mechanistic clockmaker. Francis Bacon said that God will not produce miracles to convince those who cannot see the miracle of a growing blade of grass and falling rain. As science and technology have become increasingly separated from ethical, moral, and sacred considerations, so have the implications of such a separation become more somber and horrifying, as we see, for example, in genetic manipulation or in the consequences of the kind of scientific arrogance so blatant in the scandal of BSE. I believe there is a growing sense of the danger of these materialist presumptions in our increasingly alienated and dissatisfied world. Some may say that the tide is perhaps beginning to turn, but I fear there are still large herds of conventional sacred cows blocking the path. Some scientists are slowly coming to realize the awe-inspiring complexity and mystery of the universe. But there remains a need to rediscover the bridge between what the great faiths of the world have recognized as our inner and our outer worlds, our physical and our spiritual nature. That bridge is the expression of our humanity. It fulfills this role through the medium of traditional knowledge and art, which have civilized mankind and without which civilization could not long be maintained. After centuries of neglect and cynicism, the transcendental wisdom of the great religious traditions, including the Judeo-Christian and the Islamic, and the metaphysics of the Platonic tradition, which was such an important inspiration for Western philosophical and spiritual ideas, is finally being rediscovered. I have always felt that tradition is not a man-made element in our lives, but a God-given intuition of natural rhythms, of the fundamental harmony which emerges from the union of those paradoxical opposites which exist in every aspect of nature. Tradition reflects the timeless order of the cosmos and anchors us into an awareness of the great mysteries of the universe, so that, as Blake put it, we can see the whole universe in an atom and eternity in a moment. That is why I believe man is so much more than just a biological phenomenon resting on what we now seem to define as the bottom line of the great balance sheet of life, according to which art and culture are seen increasingly as optional extras in life. This view is so contrary, for example, to the outlook of the Muslim craftsman or artist, which was never concerned with display for its own sake, nor with progressing ever forward in its own ingenuity, but was content to submit a man's craft to God. That outlook reflects, I believe, the memorable passage in the Quran, whithersoever you return, there is the face of God, and God is all-embracing, all-knowing. While appreciating that this essential innocence has been destroyed and destroyed everywhere, I nevertheless believe that the survival of civilized values as we have inherited them from our ancestors depends on the corresponding survival in our hearts of that profound sense of the sacred and the spiritual. Traditional religions, with their integral view of the universe, can help us in an important way to rediscover the importance of the integration of the secular and the sacred. As I tried to argue in my speech in Oxford in 1993 on Islam and the West, the danger of ignoring this essential aspect of our existence is not just spiritual or intellectual, it also lies at the heart of that great divide between the Islamic and Western worlds over the place of materialism in our lives. In those instances where Islam chooses to reject Western materialism, this is not, in my view, only a political affectation or the result of envy or a sense of inferiority. Quite the opposite. And the danger that the gulf between the worlds of Islam and the other major Eastern religions on the one hand and the West on the other will grow ever wider and more unbridgeable is real. unless we can explore together practical ways of integrating the sacred and the secular in both our cultures in order to provide a true inspiration for the next century. This rediscovery of an integrated view of the sacred could also help us in areas of important practical activity. In medicine, whatever some scientists might say, the rupture between religion and science, between the material world and the sense of the sacred, has too often led to a blinkered approach to healthcare and to a failure to understand the wholeness and manifest mystery of the healing process. Hospitals need to be conceived and, above all, designed to reflect the wholeness of healing if they are to help the process of recovery in a more complete way. Modern medicine remains too often a one-dimensional approach to illness which, however sophisticated and miraculous in some of its achievements, cannot of itself understand more than a fraction of what there is to know, and can still be enriched and enlightened by more traditional approaches. There are, I am glad to say, beacons of light seeking to integrate the modern and traditional approaches which I have come across over the years, such as the Marylebone Healthcare Centre in London or the Bristol Cancer Help Centre. Our environment has suffered beyond our worst nightmares, in part because of a one-sided approach to economic development which, until very recently, failed to take account of the interrelatedness of creation. Little thought was given to the importance of finding that sustainable balance which worked within the grain of nature and understood the vital necessity of setting and respecting limits. This, for example, is why protection of our environment is a relatively recent concern, and why organic and sustainable farming are so important if we are to use the land in a way which will safeguard its ability to nourish future generations. A third area in which this separation of the material and spiritual has had dramatic consequences is architecture. I believe this separation lies at the heart of the failure of so much modern architecture to understand the essential spiritual quality and the traditional principles that reflect a cosmic harmony from which come buildings with which people feel comfortable and in which they want to live. That is why I started my own small institute of architecture some 5 years ago. Titus Burckhardt. If I've pronounced that wrong, I do apologize. I will learn to correct myself. He wrote, "It is the nature of art to rejoice the soul, but not every art possesses a spiritual dimension." We see this spirituality in traditional Christian architecture, which incidentally was also inspired by a far more profound symbolic awareness than could ever be imagined by those who categorize such architecture as a question of mere style. This spiritual dimension also infuses the intricate geometric and arabesque patterns of Islamic art and architecture, which are ultimately a manifestation of divine unity, which in turn is the central message of the Quran. The Prophet Muhammad himself is believed to have said, "God is beautiful and he loves beauty." Look also at urban planning. The great historian Ibn Khaldun understood that the intimate relationship between city life and spiritual tranquility was an essential basis for civilization. Can we ever again return to such harmony in our cities? As civilizations decay, so do the crafts, as Ibn Khaldun again wrote. All these principles come down in the end to a battle for preserving sacred values. It is a battle to restore an understanding of the spiritual integrity of our lives and for reintegrating what the modern world has fragmented. Islamic culture in its traditional form has striven to preserve this integrated spiritual view of the world in a way we have not seen fit to do in recent generations in the West. There is much we can share with that Islamic worldview in this respect, and much in that worldview which can help us to understand the shared and timeless elements in our two faiths. In that common endeavour, both our modern societies, Islamic and Western, can learn afresh the traditional views of life common to our religions, as well as the sacred responsibilities we have for the care and stewardship of the world around us. In my Oxford speech in 1993, I argued for a much greater effort to be made to encourage understanding between the Islamic and Western worlds. My firm belief in the importance of that process has not changed. The harm that will be done to both cultures if ignorance and prejudice persist or grow will be incalculable. There are many ways in which this understanding and appreciation can be built, but even if we begin with a simple understanding of the sacred, which permeates every aspect of our world, there is the potential for establishing new and valuable links between Islamic civilization and the West. Perhaps, for instance, we could begin by having more Muslim teachers in British schools, or by encouraging exchanges of teachers. Everywhere in the world, people are seemingly wanting to learn English, but in the West, in turn, we need to be taught by Islamic teachers how to learn once again with our hearts, as well as our heads. The approaching millennium may be the ideal catalyst for helping to explore and stimulate these links, and I hope we shall not ignore the opportunity this gives us to rediscover the spiritual underpinning of our entire existence. For myself, I am convinced that we cannot afford, for the health and sustainability of a civilized existence, any longer to ignore these timeless features of our world. A sense of the sacred can, I believe, help provide the basis for developing a new relationship of understanding which can only enhance the relations between our two faiths, and indeed between all faiths, for the benefit of our children and future generations. I have made a few notes on some themes that I had tried to categorize from this speech. I think it's such a wonderful speech, wonderfully written for sure, because I feel like whilst Prince Charles was able to articulate his points across in such few sentences, I still feel like there's a lot to decipher even within those sentences if you looked deeply enough. And I find those kind of speeches and writings really intriguing, because it just, where there's depth, there's more to be told, there's more knowledge to, not even knowledge, wisdom to pursue in and to decipher and try and integrate into our lives of whether this truly aligns with our values. And it's very clear that the Prince has considered all of these points and whether they aligned with his values. And for that, I think is very commendable. So the first theme, I'm not too sure how to categorize this. I will probably categorize it better as the YouTube timestamps. Through the YouTube timestamps. But fear of ridicule even when mentioning God. So in his, I will refer to the speech here and there, but he says, this fear of ridicule, even to the extent of mentioning the name of God, is a classic indication of the loss of meaning in so-called Western civilization. I think we're living in a time where secular thoughts are more dominating, to the point where even just mentioning that you are religious has some sort of stigma, no matter what religion you're from. It's the fact of you believing in a God and this stigma of it being organized as if you're following a cult. And I think that's such a horrible way to describe it, but that is the feeling I get from secular-minded people, that you can tell already has a negative presumption of just religion in general, and it's inflicted on their views on religious people, as if people that embody traditional religious values are on another planet. That's the vibe that I've picked up from. But I think it's very commendable for Prince Charles. I'm going to refer to him as Prince Charles because this was his state of consciousness at the time of writing the speech. But I'm sure that he still stands by the same values even today. But having the status of what he had as a prince, and even talking to property developers and international financiers and important, powerful people, but still being able to have that conversation, bringing religion into it and a sense of the sacred, I think is such a brave act, especially when he says it strikes an extraordinary chord. And I think that is a lot to be grateful for people of all around the world and of different faiths. To be grateful that there's some sort of a representative, a higher figure in our society, in our hierarchy, that still pushes and advocates for this traditional knowledge and sacredness that all these faiths share. And I mean, I'm going on now, but I don't want to go on for too long, but there's no like bias from the prince of a certain religion. There are obviously some that he has more interest over the other perhaps, but it's more personal to him. But overall, he has always been a defender of all faiths. If anything, that is what he's known for, and I think that is a honourable approach in his many works that he has done. And I just want to build up, I am looking at my notes, to build up the theme that he is courageous despite this topic triggering a lot of people, because it's evident that Prince Charles was in his pursuit of wisdom, in his pursuit of knowledge and the truth, and so what he's trying to discover, he's sharing it from his conviction that this is the right thing to share, the right thing to do. And I respect that kind of personality. So yeah, that is the theme of, I would say, bravery in a secular environment. I'll think of a better title. The second theme I'd like to explore is the separation between religion and science. I think it's very sensible that Prince Charles had acknowledged the service that science has done in showing us how complex the world is, and he also refers to later the awe-inspiring complexity and mystery of the universe, which I agree. I feel like science is very important, and it's always had a relationship with religion throughout its time. But what I found really interesting was he labeled modern materialistic thinking as one-dimensional form, and I'm not too sure if I expressed this in the Reimagining Governance discussion video that I had posted a while back, but in my notes definitely I had wrote one-dimensional thinking compared to like multiple dimensional thinking. I can't remember how I articulated it, but it was interesting to see that a similar thought process between us, that I didn't equate it to modern or materialistic thinking, but Prince Charles did. And now that I'm reflecting on it, I can see and look back that with the politicians of today, especially in the UK, they all come from a modernist background, a modernist thinking approach. There's no sense of the sacred in their words or in their mannerism or in their characters that they portray as politicians. Of course, personal lives are separate. And it really shows, and perhaps there might be a correlation between modernist thinking and one-dimensional forms. And the fact that Prince Charles says that he cannot explain everything is still true of today, and we have to acknowledge that. And it's just finding that healthy balance between using science where necessary, but also where it coincides with religion, but vice versa. If religion isn't making sense where science is backing up to a much closer truth, then that also has to be acknowledged. But he's saying it's a separation with a hint or an indication that he much prefers it to be of unity. Especially that he has this special quote from William Wordsworth that he brings into this speech. Little we see in nature that is ours, and he brings in topic of stewardship and dominion over earth, and especially with like the Christian perspective of dominion of the earth, etc. Very interesting themes with nature and our relationship to it. And with that being separated, it's almost like science is the opposite of nature and religion is nature. But I don't think he's trying to say that directly, but it's like an analogy, which is quite interesting as well. I guess it can also be argued that science is more of a logical type of thinking, whereas religion or religious way of thinking is more creative. It's more having faith in the unknown, miracles, things that cannot be explained. And that can also correlate to the left-hand side of the brain and the right-hand side of the brain, where it's logical on the left-hand side but creative on the right. And one is not greater than the other. It's more of a healthy balance, which I think he brings into the concept of medicine, where modern medicine can be great, but if you neglect traditional approaches where healing had been done for many centuries, then it becomes less humanistic and less respectful to, well, I wouldn't say respectful, less in adherence to the Tao is what I'd call it, the way of life, the way of nature. The next theme I'd like to explore is Islam's rejection of Western materialism. I think it's really interesting how Prince Charles's depiction of Islam is that it appreciates beauty, and he believes that the art and architecture in Islam is ultimately a manifestation of divine unity, which he believes is the central message of the Quran, as well as many other Muslims. And also quoting Prophet Muhammad saying, God is beautiful and he loves beauty. I think what Prince Charles sees is that beauty is what rejects materialism, because it's appreciating further beyond what its physical worth is or value. It's beyond that. It's in the geometric shapes, it's in the colors, it's in the, and Charles often says the word cosmic, and it's such a, how could you even encapsulate and define cosmic? It's just boundless, it's infinity, it's beyond the world. And I think there's a correlation that he makes with that and beauty. And so this is what leads him into urban planning and architecture as a core principle for how a society is run. He also mentions agriculture and healthcare, so looking after the earth, natural organic farming, etc. But then building cities with beauty, it's almost like it's not just the result but the act of a craftsman doing it as well. I am trying to find where he says, if you just give me a moment. So the outlook of the Muslim craftsman or artist, which was never concerned with the display for its own sake, nor with progressing ever forward in its own ingenuity, but was content to submit a man's craft to God. So having an appreciation for beauty is in a way an act of appreciating the divine and being in service to God, because you're going beyond the materialistic result that should also be appreciated too and is what it's there for, but it goes beyond those borders. And I'm not too familiar with the works of Roger Scruton, but I am familiar with his advocacy for beauty and in architecture, and it goes very similar to what Prince Charles had tried to articulate in this essay. And he sees that Islam's rejection of the Western materialism is through its beauty, its art, its architecture, but not just through that. It will be through its preservation of other of their traditions as well. But this is the core theme that he tries to bring in, as well as within urban planning, mentioning a great historian called Ibn Khaldun. I may have pronounced that wrong. And so he tries to integrate that core concept that he resonates with and trying to bring that into the West by reminding us that this can be done for Christianity as well. I think there's a stigma, especially with the political scene of today, with Islamophobia, the term Islamophobia I'm referring to, and the dissonance, if that's the right word, between the Muslim population and the ethnic British population and their thoughts on migration, etc. It's kind of, from my opinion, geared towards the fear of Islam taking over the country, sort of thing. And whilst that may be a topic for another video to really explore and dive into, and where I could give my personal take on it, I don't think that's what Prince Charles is advocating, to bring in all Islamic values into the West. It's actually just integrating enough so that the West can preserve Christianity, because he mentions a lot about traditional Christianity, especially in their architecture, and gives credit to them. And King Charles is a Christian, or at least he says so and goes to church. I mean, when it comes to perennialism, there's an appreciation for other religions, but it's a notion of just choosing your faction. Whatever one chooses is one's wishes, but this notion of integrating the traditional preservation that Islam is clearly being successful in, it's like, why not learn from where there's success and try and bring that into our own. The last theme, which is improving Christian and Muslim relations, I've touched a bit upon this with the previous theme, but I just want to go over Prince Charles's notion of having more Muslim teachers in British schools, and then in turn encouraging exchanges of teachers, so having Western teachers in the eastern side of the world, the Islamic eastern side of the world, or whether he meant that as just the West and the East in general, or whether he meant that specifically with Islamic part of the world, I'm not too sure. But he emphasizes the need for this, which is very interesting, and I know, just like he said, it can strike extraordinary chords within people, especially on both sides, because there is a notion that, you know, the Islamic countries, they fear modernism, they fear Western habits, but that's already started to integrate, especially in Dubai and maybe Qatar, etc. But likewise, there's what is the word? A fear of this country becoming Islamic, with Muslims taking over due to migration, etc. And these are all concerns that I always try and understand from both sides, and maybe a topic for another video. But it's very interesting how the Prince of Wales, the Prince at his time, have been suggesting this in a time, especially this would have been before 9/11 as well. And so already acknowledging there is a word for this, distaste for Islam, for Muslims. I don't think the word is distaste. It's like unsureness, temporal, unsafe, unstable. I'm not able to find the right word, but this unstable view of Muslims has already taken occur, and this was before 9/11. So imagine the state of the world that we have obviously progressed until now, and all this journey that we've come through into accepting and understanding and trying to improve relations between people of different civilizations, different religions, different countries as well. I mean, Russia is also known to be a traditionalist type country. Putin also has a lot of traditional values. There are some videos I've noticed about traditional perennialism, or just the traditionalist school of thought, and it has his face as well as King Charles as examples of today that are still carrying on these teachings. So I'm yet to explore that. But there's this reluctance, that is the word, reluctance in integration. And I suppose it's understandable, because when you're in a community, you're in your pack, you're in your herd, and so anything outside or foreign is to be cautious of, which is another word I was looking for. Yes, to be cautious of, and that is completely understandable. But then it's always having that bird's eye view, a broader picture, a practical picture of, well, to improve, or not necessarily to improve, but to preserve. If you're not doing something that another group is doing, to preserve your own traditions, then I think it's time to try and understand what the other group is doing and try and implement it in your own group. And it's not so copying everything or turning this group into Islamic and losing Christianity at all. I don't think Prince Charles has ever tried to advocate for that, even though it can be misinterpreted very easily, just because the word Muslim or Islamic can be quite triggering in itself. From my experience and perspective, that is what I've seen. But it's more so preserving traditional Christian values. And there's a lot that I advocate for this country in preserving their natural traditional heritage from its previous civilizations and ancestors, and preserving and continuing on their line. I have no desire to turn this country into an Islamic one. That serves its purpose in its areas, in my opinion. And so, the bare minimum, but as well as the most, there's no leeway between too much or too little. There has to be a core movement in trying to improve these relations whatsoever, especially in the Abrahamic branch. These two religions are so close to each other. They're under the same family tree, quite literally, the Abrahamic family tree, that yes, there are loads of differences and disagreements in a certain way of beliefs, etc., or even certain traditions and practices, because whilst they might not be in adherence to the actual scriptures of those religions, there are a lot of cultural, of the environment and location and the time that the scripture was delivered to, that takes precedence in reluctance to change outside of it. And so that is completely understandable. Acknowledge those differences, but if we are to make progress to improve the relations, we have to at least have some sincerity to understand the other side of the world, or the other side of that barrier that we are projecting onto each other. And it's quite hard because everyone's in their own lives and they care about these things, but yet they're not willing to take the plunge or take some of their time to actually understand a whole different world or a whole different civilization and what they believe in. And it can be because of predetermined bias and prejudice against it. But if we can learn to break that, not necessarily just for the result of this topic or this essay, but just as a personal human development, to be our best selves, and to, as I always say in this channel, to question whether our reality aligns with our values. Not necessarily someone's reality for me, but my own reality, my own perception. Is this the kind of person that I want to be? If I am preaching that I follow this certain way or this religion, then am I reflecting its values? Am I representing these values? These are all important questions, and I do believe these are questions that Prince Charles, as well as the King Charles now, of course they're the same person, but they had different states of consciousness. I do truly believe that him questioning and seeking the truth and criticizing his own self to improve and to be his best version has always been there, has always been dominating in his life. Otherwise we wouldn't have seen the work that he has done today for his country, as well as for other countries, for faiths and other religions and communities, etc. And yes, that may be his role as a prince, but I do believe he has gone above and beyond that. And for that I am very grateful for this speech, and I do hope to have this discussion for his other speeches and other involvement in perennialism or traditional perennialism. I hope this video has given you some ideas to dwell upon. And for that, I'd like to end this video with my disclaimer that I am by no means claiming that I am knowledgeable in everything, except that I am in the humble pursuit of wisdom. Thank you so much for watching.